Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Purposeful Conversations with me, Emmy, here in the PAMI Code Facebook community. I hope you're doing well today. And our guest for today is really special. And we actually had a conversation previously, and it's actually nice to get back to my roots and talk about science for a change. So, with all the mindset and resilience stuff that we've been talking for the past couple of episodes, our guest today is a mindset coach, and we're here to talk about the neuroscience of mindset. So, without further ado, let's all welcome Claudia Garbutt. Hi, Claudia.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a
Well, thank you
pleasure.
for joining us. I think it's quite nice to have a conversation about mindset, scientist to scientist. Because yeah, for the past couple of episodes, we're talking about really interesting things as well, talking about spirituality and your intuition and so on. But it would be nice to balance it once again with science and getting back to discussions around rewiring the brain and how that works from a neuroscience perspective. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you first, how did you get started as a mindset coach?
To be honest, it has been quite a bumpy road to get to where I am right now. But I guess in hindsight, I guess I needed all the detours to figure out what I really wanted to do. And I really like that quote by Steve Jobs, who said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards." And I think that's so very true. Now I'm starting to see the picture. But so I guess my story started back in 2015. So I'm a molecular biologist by profession. And back then, I was still working in New Zealand on a PhD project in physiology. And unfortunately, by that time, my scholarship had run out, which meant that I had to pay the high tuition fees without earning any money. And on top of that, our research fund had run out too, which meant that I didn't even have the money to finish my lab experience. So that's when my son was born. And to complicate things even further, we found out that I was pregnant again only 6 months after our son was born, which was a bit of a surprise, a pleasant one,
Wow.
of course. But yeah, I mean, it didn't make things easier, of course. So we also didn't have any family living close by that could have helped us in any way. So that's when we decided to move back from New Zealand back to Germany, where my family lives, just to be a little bit closer and to maybe get some help with the kids, right? And to be honest, during those first, say, maybe 2 or 3 years of being a new mom, I didn't have any energy to even think about going back to work. It was all just so overwhelming because my kids were very fussy. So they
It sounds exhausting as well to have to juggle all of that at the same time.
yes, they cried a lot, and then there was a lot of personal, like family drama going on at that point in time as well. So it was really overwhelming. And by the time things finally started to improve, I was sure that I wanted to find a new line of work that was more flexible than the lab work I had been doing previously. And that allowed me to be there for my kids because, as you know, motherhood just changes your priorities and your perspective,
Mm.
right? So I knew that my best shot would be to find something more flexible, would be to do something online, just because I could choose the hours that I can work on my project. And it would also mean that I could work from anywhere in the world, which is nice when half of your family lives on the other side of the planet and you're not quite sure where you're going to end up. So yet I had absolutely no clue as to what I could do online. And it was very scary and overwhelming just to think about doing something so entirely different and out of my comfort zone, because my identity was very closely linked to being a biologist and I love science. So since I didn't know where to start or how to start, I simply followed the joy. And that meant I was starting to dabble in things that I enjoyed and that I knew I could do online. So I sold photos on print on demand websites, and I experimented with a bit of graphic design and digital art, and I started a blog because I enjoyed writing. And it's kind of funny when you think about it, because as a scientist, I was used to predominantly use my rational analytical skills. And there I was using mainly my creative and intuitive side. And while I was really enjoying this creative side of myself, I felt that something fundamental was missing. So I missed the science bit, I missed the human connection, and I missed being on a bigger mission that had a real or made a real impact on people's lives. Because as a biologist, I had worked in on inherently meaningful projects like developing drought-resistant food plants to fight world hunger, or basic brain research to better understand and ultimately hopefully treat neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So I had always had these huge visions that just pulled me along and pulled me forward and helped me to get through the rough patches, right? And now things were more difficult because I didn't have those strong visions anymore and nothing that really pulled me forward. And on the other thing that really influenced me dramatically during that time was that I found myself struggling with so many worries and so many fears, like from imposter syndrome to fear of rejection and fear of judgment and fear of failure, you name it. So, and all those mental blocks, they were absolutely paralyzing. And I found that I made so many excuses to not do all the things that I knew I should do in order to gain more, say, exposure or visibility with the things that I did. And yet I kept super busy so that I could tell myself I was doing everything I could, when in fact I was just doing the busy work that got me
Yeah, did
nowhere.
you feel like you were just running around in
Yes,
circles and not really achieving it? Because you have no goal, you had no real purpose.
exactly. So, and I noticed that I wasn't alone with these experiences, and it seemed that so many people were either consciously or unconsciously dealing with the same negative thought patterns and self sabotaging behavior. Now, on the one hand, that was obviously troubling. On the other hand, though, it was endlessly fascinating, because where was all this behavior coming from? What was driving it? And what could we do about it? So the scientist in me was back in the game, and I started to study mindset and psychology and behavioral sciences and the neuroscience that is associated with our mental and behavioral habits, and I was hooked. So I used what I learned to improve my own life dramatically, and when I stumbled upon the coaching industry, it all clicked.
Mm.
I could change people's lives by teaching them all these concepts and ideas. And that was one of those, like, these light
Light
bulb
bulb.
moments that you just can't forget, because it changes the whole trajectory of your life. So that, yeah, it was like putting all the puzzle pieces together and being able to see the whole picture for the first time. And that was my solution that combined flexibility and science and creativity, intuition, human connection, and real impact. And that's why I'm so excited about what I do now.
I love it, and I can see a lot of parallels between us, because it's it's you made that change after you've given birth, and all this turmoil that's going on. You want the flexibility, and so did I. I also come from an academic background, and after giving birth to my son, it felt overwhelming. And I just wanted to have that flexibility and make that change, to make that leap and do something online. But the same thing, it was quite scary. I don't know what I was doing. It's completely different to what I was used to. And I don't know about you, but you might be thinking, I've trained for so many years in
Yes,
academia to do academic work, and then to have to start over
I know.
in the online world. And how are you gonna? But it was quite interesting, because it's a journey. You learn all the time. And to be doing this mindset work now, in the same with me, I wrote my books My three books, Change Your Life for Good, Imposter Syndrome Remedy, and Fear is Not My Enemy, essentially because I also went through those emotions, those struggles. And for me as a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
I understood the mechanisms. And for me, it sort of helped me to make sense of my experience, and to come up with the strategies as well, to help me and to realize that I could also help others. So it's wonderful that we have so many similarities. And what I loved about your story is, even from coming from a very academic scientific background, you also learned how to use your intuition, your creativity, to actually follow your purpose and follow your heart. And that's where it got you to where you are now.
Yeah, I love it. I think you always have to integrate all the different parts of your personality to come to that point where you feel that you're completely aligned on all levels and you have reached the thing, or you have found the thing that you really want to do.
Absolutely. Now that you're doing mindset work, there are different people working in mindset, and you can classify them into several categories. Some of them might dismiss mindset work as a lot of fluff, without any real implications, or they think that it's some sort of magic pill that will transform lives overnight. So how would you explain what mindset really is, like what mindset work really is?
Yeah, I think mindset work is definitely a concept that can be a little elusive and maybe a little hard to explain. So I try my best. So I know it's often the highly rational and analytical people who have a lot of resistance around this concept. And I totally get it, because it was the same for me in the beginning. So it took me a long time to get over that initial resistance and to dismiss my disbelief just long enough to just test out the things and give those strategies a fair chance. So in the beginning, it was all way too woo-woo for me. So as a scientist, I was used to thinking you can only believe what you can see.
I'm surprised with that, because I'm a scientist. Well, my background is Skinnerian, so
Yeah,
as a psychologist, yeah, I do know about mindset, and from a scientific point of view. But in your case, you did struggle a little bit with that.
absolutely. Because for me, it was all just numbers and running experiments. This side was something that I hadn't really explored before. So yeah, as I said, I was used to thinking you can only believe in what you can see. And now I know that in fact the opposite is much closer to the truth, and you can only see what you believe in. And let me explain why. So the short version is that, and you can probably agree on that, your beliefs act as information filters. So, what does that mean? So, at any given point in time, you experience this flood of internal and external information that is far too large to be analyzed consciously. Now, we have to understand that all of us, we have two mental systems. So, one is the conscious and flexible one, but at the same time, it's slow, it's highly energy demanding, and it is very limited in its processing capacities. So the second one is unconscious, it's automated. It's very fast, energy efficient, and it has a much bigger processing capacity. And when I say bigger, we are talking at least 25,000 times bigger than the capacity of our conscious mind. Therefore, it makes sense energy-wise to automate thoughts, emotions, and behavior so that these routines can be run subconsciously. And that's exactly what we're all doing. Therefore, it might not be much of a surprise that it's estimated that about 95% of what we do on a daily basis are things we have automated and we do without thinking. So that's the power of the subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind scans all the incoming information, and it needs some filters to decide what's important enough to let through to your and to let through and let it pass to your conscious awareness. So those filters are your beliefs and your experiences. They shape your expectations. So your unconscious mind will use the filters to show your conscious mind the bits of information that are congruent with your current beliefs. That's why you only see what you believe in. So if you believe that the world is a wonderful place, you will see plenty of evidence to support your belief. If you believe, on the other hand, that the world is a terrible place, you will see plenty of evidence to support that belief just as well. So here's the true power of mindset work in a nutshell. So by creating more supportive beliefs, you change your expectations. By changing your expectations, you're changing your experiences. By changing your experiences, you are changing your behavior. And finally, by changing your behavior, you're changing the results you're seeing in your life. And people who dismiss mindset work as fluff, they haven't fully understood that concept yet. And those people who think it's some sort of magic pill that simply thinking positive thoughts is going to solve all their problems overnight, they're likely to be disappointed because they missed the part about changing their behavior to change their results. So you can sit on the sofa and think about winning the lottery all day long. If you don't at least get up and buy a lottery ticket, your chances of winning are still zero, right? So that's basically it.
Yeah. Yes, there's actually a really clear pathway from thoughts to behavior to to the consequences of those thoughts and behavior. So you are absolutely right. Our thoughts can influence our perception, our behavior, and therefore the outcomes that we get in our life. But for those people who just stop at the thoughts without having any implications on their behavior, that's where the gap is.
Yeah.
So it's not just about changing your thoughts, that the thoughts actually need to change the behavior. And I think the gap there, even for us psychologists now, with my work as a health psychologist, there is a gap between intention and actual behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
you have the thought, there's the intention, but the actual behavior, sometimes it doesn't follow through. So actually doing what you were thinking is really important, but the starting point is the belief. The starting point is the thought, because the thought can influence your perception and the way you respond and the way you behave externally. So that's really good that you've explained that. It's certainly something that, for us as psychologists, we've worked for decades, looking at all these pathways of cognition to behavior. But yeah, there is a gap sometimes, in terms of converting the intention, the thought
Yeah.
into behavior. But you know when it comes to rewiring your brain, we talk a lot about mindset and rewiring your brain. And again, this is also something that I've talked about in my books. Could you explain from a neuroscientist's perspective what that actually means?
Sure. So I like to think about it like this. So the neurons in your brain, they don't exist in isolation. They are all interconnected by trillions of connections. So those patterns of connections, they are constantly changing. And as Hab's law states, neurons that fire together wire together. So this whole concept is called neuroplasticity, and that's the ability of the brain to change its structure and its function in response to your experiences. So when neurons are simultaneously activated, they form a physical connection. And those patterns, they basically form webs of associations based on your beliefs and your life experiences. So those connections, they get strengthened each time the same neurons are simultaneously activated. It's kind of like building a super highway between those neurons. So if you have automated, for example, negative thoughts, they just speed along this neuronal superhighway and they make it stronger each time they do. On the other hand, when you start to disrupt that connection and you begin to activate another neuronal web instead, you're starting to take the former neuronal superhighway apart and you begin to build a new one that leads to another destination. And the more often you use that new connection, the stronger it will grow. And that's also why it's so hard to change an old habit, because you have to deconstruct old neuronal pathways and to build new ones. And it also explains why things are so easy and effortless once you have turned them into habits, because they have become automated, and by using the same neuronal highways over and over, they continue to strengthen those connections. So to sum it all up, yes, you're literally rewiring your brain by changing its existing patterns of neuronal connections. And that we are actually able to use our own minds to physically change our brains is something that is just endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah,
That's
for
just,
me as well. I mean, neuroplasticity, I actually do love that because for some people who shall we say have a fixed mindset, they think that this is who I am, this is how I've always been. But when you put in that growth mindset concept, and in terms of the neuroscience perspective, neuroplasticity, there is a way to rewire your brain. You can unlearn old habits and create new ones, but that could take a bit of time, because it does take a bit of time and repetition and practice to create those new neural pathways. That's why we do. I don't know what's your position in this. Some researchers would say it takes 21 days to form a new habit, others would say it takes 66 days, but it does take a bit of
yeah,
time and
yeah.
repetition and practice to start building those new connections and build those new habits.
Yeah, I think they say about 21 days to create a new one, but to really strengthen that and everything, you would say 60 to 70 days is more realistic.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, I love it. Whenever we talk about neuroplasticity, it gives me comfort that not everything is fixed. That even if you've been stuck in a certain way, there are ways to get you unstuck and unlearn old habits, unlearn old patterns, and create new ones. You have that flexibility to create those new neural pathways in your brain, so your thoughts can actually lead you, like what we've been talking about earlier, to modify your behavior based on what you think as well. So in line with that, why do you think mindset work is so important for achieving your goals?
So in an ideal world, we would all have like only super supportive and helpful beliefs that allow us to achieve our goals and to thrive in life. Unfortunately, as you probably can attest to, that's usually not the case. Most of our beliefs, they form between the ages of 0 and 6 or maybe 7, and that's during a time when our brain hasn't fully matured yet. So at that developmental stage, kids, they develop memory and imagination, and they start to grasp some like symbolic concepts and that sort of stuff. Yet they're very egocentric, and by that I mean that they often interpret circumstances as linked to themselves, and they often think that everyone shares their thoughts and beliefs or feelings, and their logic and reasoning skills, they just haven't fully developed yet. So to understand why we develop our beliefs during that time, um, I like to think of it that way. So imagine you suddenly find yourself on an alien planet, and you don't understand how things work there, and you don't fully understand the people there either. Now, everything is new, and that's very frightening because you don't know the rules. And if you don't know the rules, you can't predict what's going to happen. And that's kind of what it must feel like for a child's brain. So the brain doesn't like the uncertainty. And what I think happens is that it just starts to come up with hypothetical rules, aka your beliefs, and then it tests them in an attempt to predict what's going to happen next. Because predicting the future based on a set of rules is a super powerful survival strategy. So imagine you believe that a lion was only like an oversized cat who wants his head scratched. Well, that's a dangerous belief, right? Now imagine on the other hand, you associated lions with danger and you believe that they ain't humans. So you would try to avoid encountering lions and therefore you would be far less likely to be eaten by one. So your belief helped you predict possible outcomes of a situation and shaped your behavior in order to avoid undesired outcomes or undesired consequences. So the big advantage of having those beliefs is also that we don't have to consciously think about how we want to react in certain situations. So a trigger will start an automated routine, saving us energy and reaction time. So going back to that example, if we saw a lion, we had to consciously think through the whole scenario before we reached our conclusion, it would be too late to get out of the lion's way. So now most of us, we don't encounter lions that often, right? Still, we form beliefs that help us react quickly and navigate challenging situations. So unfortunately, nowadays, a lot of the beliefs we form aren't as supportive and helpful as avoiding a lion when we see one. So for example, when you're growing up, for example, when you were growing up, you might have seen your parents arguing about money all the time and fight over money all the time. So you felt the tension and you saw the anger and the frustration on their faces and you heard the threatening tone of their voices. And because you didn't quite understand what was going on, you just started to associate money with anger and frustration and emotional pain. So you might have formed an unconscious belief that when something like this, money is bad and turns people against each other. So now as you grew up, that subconscious belief might have turned into an automated pattern that led you to sabotage any conscious attempts to make money because your subconscious mind believed that not having any money would avoid conflicts with your loved ones. And that's why mindset work is so important for achieving your goals, because it helps you become aware of those mental blocks and helps you change your beliefs to more supportive ones so that you don't sabotage yourself when you're trying to achieve your goals.
Yeah, and actually one thing that you mentioned there is becoming aware of those blocks so you can actually rewire and do something about it, which leads to the next question. If you actually want to start to shift your mindset and engage in mindset work, what's the first step that you need to take?
Yeah, exactly as you said. So the first step is always to become aware of what's going on. So you want to become aware of the way you think and the way your mind works. So it really helps to take some time each day just to analyze what thoughts you have throughout the day and what feelings and behaviors are associated with those thoughts. So you want to find the patterns in your life. Are you always responding the same way in a certain situation? And why? And what's triggering you? Those are the kind of questions that you want to start asking yourself. And believe me, once you have gained a better understanding of your inner workings, you will be amazed by the way by what you can achieve once you get out of your own way.
Yes, and yes, awareness is really important. And what I have to say though is there are some people who don't want to go to that place.
Mm.
Probably because they are scared or they are in denial, or even when these thoughts are coming up, they try to suppress it, they try to ignore it, or try to have a fight with it. What would you say about that?
I think you have to face them, but without judgment. So don't be too hard on yourself. Just see what's coming up and don't judge it. Be kind to yourself. So yeah, that's probably just what I would suggest there.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk a lot about in this group, these inner critic messages, and
Yeah.
sometimes people can be quite hard on themselves when they hear these inner critic messages. The thoughts that say you're not good enough, that you're going to fail, that people are gonna make fun of you, and so on. And they try to have a fight with those inner critic messages. And what I would say is, in my books as well, I talk about the TLC technique, and it's not necessarily tender loving care. We still talk about compassionate self talk. But when we talk about the TLC technique, we talk about it in terms of asking the questions: is it true, is it logical, is it constructive? Because that way it encourages you to explore these thoughts rather than suppressing them. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you become aware and when you engage in these conversations, whether it is with your mentor, your coach, or even if it is just a personal self-reflection, when you ask the questions: is it true, is it logical, is it constructive? It enables you to explore where these thoughts are coming from, how it's affecting you, and what you can do about it.
Yeah, I love that. So I would say approach them with kind curiosity. Just stay open and like try to be the scientist and just to want to find out what is at the bottom. Where's this coming from? So yeah, kind curiosity. That's what I
I
would say.
love that. Oh, that's my word for the day. Well, kind
Yay!
curiosity. It's just being curious. Usually we say it in terms of, compassionate self-talk, but I love that kind curiosity. You want to explore, you want to look into it without judgment, but with kindness and compassion. And that's a way we need to treat ourselves when we're having this internal dialogue in our head. And if it is quite a struggle, if you've always been quite aggressive on yourself, maybe
Yeah.
that's how you've been before, having a mentor or a coach could help you to practice that. As you've said, it does take a little bit of time to rewire your brain, to unlearn those habits and to create those new neural pathways. But having a coach and a mentor could actually help you to guide you and make the process so much simpler for you. So, Claudia, if you have any last parting words to our community, when it comes to mindset, what would you say to them?
I would just like to remind you that no matter how much mindset work you might have done in the past, mindset work is an ongoing process. So just keep in mind it's not a do it once and you're done kind of thing. You just have to constantly keep doing it. There's a reason for why people talk about the next level devil. So whenever you're trying to up level or to try to, to do something that's outside of your comfort zone, you are likely to experience another block that might keep you back. So it's just something to keep in mind that even though you might have done a lot of mindset work in the past, you can't expect things to just run smoothly. So it's like exercising. You can't exercise for a week or a month and then stop
Believe
and
it.
just expect it to work in the future, right? You just have to do the stuff. You just have to do the work.
Yeah, it's like a muscle. You're training a muscle,
Yeah.
and the more you do it, the easier it gets. But if you lose it, if you stop that work, you might end up facing new barriers, and then you'll have to start again and work on that again. But thank you so much for this conversation, Claudia. I find it always fascinating talking to another scientist and talking about mindset and how really how important it is to us achieving our goals, because our thoughts and our beliefs can actually have an impact on how we see things, and therefore how we respond and behave externally. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. If people want to connect with you, and if they want to find you, where can they find you?
The best place would probably be my Facebook group at the moment. It's called Visionary Female Entrepreneurs because at the moment I'm just in the middle of rebuilding my website. So it's not quite done yet. So if you want to connect, feel free to join my Facebook group. I would love to see you there.
Can you say the Facebook group again?
Yeah, it's Visionary Female Entrepreneurs. And I do weekly mini trainings in there as well. And I really emphasize building a community. So I don't want just another Facebook group. I really emphasize building a community in there.
Wonderful. Well, if any of you would like to connect with Claudia, do join her group. It's wonderful to have all these trainings and building the community. So you actually get to practice the mindset work and try to rewire your brain accordingly. But anyway, thank you everyone for
Thank
joining
you.
us today. I hope that you found our conversation fascinating and helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or to connect with us, me, Emmy, and also Claudia. But in the meantime, have a lovely week, everyone, and we'll catch up again next time for another purposeful conversations with me, Emmy, here in the Pami Code Facebook group. Until then, take care, everyone, and bye for now. Bye. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.